So welcome everybody. So this is a talk that I was asked to do on the pillars of health, and it's something that we've been asked to provide on a number of occasions, I think, for people, because there are some foundational things that everybody can do to help improve their health and well-being generally. And this is a very general talk. It's not specific to MCAS, although I will try and make it, relevant as I go along. But it is sort of general health and well-being information that is applicable to everybody and all people. These foundations apply to everyone. So for those of you that don't know me, my name's Deborah, and I'm a naturopathic nutrition and health coach, and I'm also qualified in hypnotherapy and psychotherapy, mindfulness and integral eye movement therapy. But I also live with MCAS and various other conditions. So I come to this with a combination of my training and also my lived experience, and this is what I've used to put this together. And it's based really on my Discover Health framework, which is what I use with my health coaching clients. And it is these kind of things that are the pillars of health, the foundations of our health. And we're going to talk a little bit about each of these in turn. So we're going to look at inflammation, we're going to look at root causes for illness, gut health, detox, what we're eating and what we're drinking, our nervous system health, how well we're sleeping, movement, connection, and purpose. And those are the things that I feel are pillars of health. And this graphic shows it in a different way, really. It's the same thing, but in different, in a different form. So you can see there that well-being just sits on these pillars, and this is how we need to think of it, really. Each one of these areas is a foundational pillar that is supporting well-being for everybody. And when we are, you can imagine there, if one of those pillars was missing or if one of them was shorter than the others, then our well-being starts to be a bit wobbly and not as secure and not as well supported. So it's really important to look at each of these areas in our own lives and to ensure that we're doing a little bit in each area to support ourselves. But it becomes even more important when we live with any chronic health condition, but especially MCAS. Each of these areas is what I believe is absolutely critical to supporting our well-being when we live with MCAS. And it's the way that I've lived my life, and as I've been recovering from MCAS myself and my own illness situation, I've used each of these different tools to help me on my own journey. So the first question really to ask is, what does health mean to you? And we're looking here at a very much more broad definition of health. Is good health simply the absence of disease? So, for example, if someone has a chronic health condition, for example, if they have MS or they have, an autoimmune condition, maybe rheumatoid arthritis, but they have all of those foundations of health in place. They look after their sleep and their gut and their nutrition, and they look after their mental well-being and their stress levels, and they maintain this really healthy lifestyle, and they feel happy and content. Can you say that that person is unhealthy just because they happen to have rheumatoid arthritis? Whereas on the other hand, if someone has no diagnosed health conditions, they're, according to medical science, they're healthy, but they don't look after any of these foundations. They're drenched in stress and they have a very unhappy life, and they eat nothing but junk food, poking, processed meals into themselves and takeaways, and they feel miserable and unfulfilled. Are they really healthy? So we're thinking here about a broader definition of just whether you have a diagnosis of something or not. And for us, I feel this means, an awful lot, because even though we have MCAS, even though we might have diagnosed health conditions, it doesn't necessarily mean that we can't apply these pillars of foundational well-being to our lives and feel benefit from that and actually be healthy, even though we have MCAS. And it's just a different way of thinking about things. So I want to just talk a little bit here about this kind of principles of what we're working with here. And I've stolen this from a naturopathic friend of mine who does this as one of her talks. And I just think this is so profound. And it really does sum up the way that we work in naturopathy, with naturopathic principles. So we're talking here about my imaginary pet goldfish called Gary. There he is. And I've been really, really busy lately and, a bit strapped for cash. And I've been feeding him, cheap, poor quality food because that's all I can afford, really. And, sometimes I forget, if I'm honest, because, I'm really busy and I'm tired. So sometimes I don't even feed Gary at all. And I haven't had time to clean out his tank, and it's, full of gunk and sludge. And I look at it and feel a bit guilty. And I know, that it needs cleaning, but, I haven't got around to it. And his little toy tarsal that he had in his tank, it got broken and I haven't replaced it. So there's nothing in there for him to do. And his mate, he had a friend in there, and she died, but I haven't had time to get another one. So he's all on his own in there. Is it surprising, really, that Gary gets sick? And I noticed that, he's got one of his fins is a bit floppy and he's got some nasty wounds and things on his skin. So I take him to the vet, and the vet just gives me some ointment for his skin and his wounds, and a few vitamin drops to put, with his food. And I do that for a while and he perks up, for a while. He looks, a little bit better. But I don't fix the tank, and I don't get him another mate, and I don't give him another toy, and I don't change the food, and I'm still really busy. And Gary gets even sicker. And eventually, poor Gary dies, because that's, what happens to goldfish if they're not well cared for. But the naturopathic principle is that it applies to us as well, the environment that we're living in, how we take care of our own selves, what we're eating, the environment we're in, the interaction we have with other people, the interest and the mental stimulation that we have, our mental and emotional well-being. It's all critical. And if we're going to the doctor, and just taking some medicines, a little bit like going to the vet and getting some ointment, it's a temporary fix. It's a bit of a sticking plaster. But if we don't change the environment, if we don't clean out that tank, and we don't look at the food and buy something really nutritious for ourselves, then we can't actually heal. That sticking plaster is only ever going to be temporary. And this is the way that we work in naturopathic practice, and it's the foundation of these pillars of health, is why they're so critical, because they are the actions that are going to keep our goldfish healthy, or in our case, our cells healthy. So the first of the pillars that I want to look at is the inflammation pillar. And what is inflammation? So it's produced by the immune system in response to damage or infection, and it's meant to be a temporary, acute response that creates a lot of heat and swelling and redness and pain at the site of the injury, so that our bodies can heal. And it's meant to provoke healing and bring in blood supply and nutrients and call in the other immune cells that are needed in an emergency situation. It's meant to kill off infections and stimulate tissue repair. So it's good in the short term, it helps us to heal. But when it becomes chronic and long term, and we have this continuous, like a fire almost, burning in our bodies at a cellular level, then that becomes very damaging to our body tissues. And it is what causes a lot of illness. And it matters because, according to the National Institute of Environmental Health Sciences, many people in the Western world are experiencing some level of low-grade chronic inflammation at the moment, potentially 1 in 5 people in the UK. And it's been linked in research now to almost every condition that you can think of, from cancer to Alzheimer's and dementia, and autoimmune diseases, depression, all sorts of conditions. At the root of them, there's an inflammatory process going on. Even heart disease, we talk a lot about cholesterol, but it's actually the inflammation that is connected to that that causes the damage and, makes the cholesterol harmful. And studies are showing now that it contributes to DNA damage. cancerous cell proliferation, cell aging, and cell death. And you can see their neurological diseases, obesity, fatigue. All of these conditions are potentially influenced and have an inflammatory part to them. So reducing our inflammation levels is absolutely crucial and really, really critical to our health and our well-being. So what causes chronic inflammation? And there are many factors that cause inflammation, and some of these pillars, this is why the pillars are there, because a lot of them are helping to protect us and support us from inflammation. So diet is a massive factor, and there's lots of foods that we can eat that are pro-inflammatory, and also lots of foods that we can eat that are anti-inflammatory. So what we're eating plays a huge part in how much inflammation we have. Oxidative stress is a chemical process that happens in our bodies, and it happens naturally as part of our metabolism. So when we are producing energy in our cells, when our liver is working and detoxing things, the byproduct of that is something called free radicals that attack our cells in our body and are basically unstable molecules. And we also have increased levels of oxidative stress if we have exposure to environmental toxins and pollutions, and also through eating an inflammatory diet. All of these different things contribute to that oxidative stress process, which is responsible for lots of cell damage and cellular aging and inflammation in the body. So allergies and intolerances, if we've got any low-level allergies, intolerances grumbling away in our system, that will all be provoking inflammation. Gut dysbiosis we're going to look at. It's one of the reasons why it's there on my foundational pillars of health diagram, because our gut is foundational to reducing levels of inflammation. Our gut microbiome produces anti-inflammatory compounds, and the bad guys that can get in there and cause dysbiosis and imbalance, they produce inflammation. So if we get our gut right, it really helps us with our inflammation. Environmental toxin exposure, as I explained there, if we're exposed to lots of toxins in our environment, it contributes to inflammation. If we're not detoxing properly and stuff is building up in our system, we get inflammation. And stress, there's a lot of connection between our stress levels, our mental and emotional health, and our inflammation levels. The two have been shown in research to be really, really connected, and stress produces physical inflammation. So anything at all in our body that causes this low-level provocation of our immune system is what's contributing to this chronic inflammation picture. So that is the first pillar, really, of health, is to think about ways in which we can reduce inflammation. And as we go through the talk tonight, there are some of those things that we're going to address and look at in a bit more detail. But just thinking about the role that inflammation plays and how we can support ourselves to reduce it is key to our health. So then root causes. What's going on underneath our illnesses, what's driving our health conditions. There's often things under the surface that we need to be aware of, and if we address those and keep pathogens in our system at bay, as it were, then it contributes to our overall health and well-being. So root causes for illness, there's a huge list, and I've literally just put some here. There are various different things that can be going on under the surface that contribute to illness. So inflammation, we've just talked about. Nutrient deficiency, if we're deficient in the key nutrients that we need for our body to function, it's going to have an impact on our health and our symptoms. Blood sugar issues, if we've got metabolic dysfunction, if we've got insulin resistance or diabetes and we're not metabolizing sugar, glucose properly, then that is a root cause of illness. Mitochondrial dysfunction, I'm going to talk a little bit more about mitochondria in a minute, but they're the little organelles, they're parts of every single cell in our body has these little organelles in them called mitochondria that produce energy. And if our mitochondria are not working properly, then that contributes to a lot of illness. food intolerances, as we've said, dehydration, not having enough fluid, massively impacts our health. Thyroid issues, if we've got any of that grumbling away, impacts our metabolism and contributes to all sorts of other things. Gut dysbiosis, we've just talked about, if our gut is unhealthy. Post-viral illness. So, a lot of people are struggling with viral infections, now in this post-COVID era, particularly. There's a lot of research being done now about how COVID, but also Epstein-Barr and other viral infections linger in our body and cause ongoing issues for some people. That can be at the root cause. Neurological dysfunction, and we're going to talk about our nervous system and whether our nervous system is imbalanced there. If we've got imbalance going on and our nervous system, particularly the autonomic nervous system that controls the involuntary things that happen like breathing and heart rate and gut digestion, if that nervous system is out of balance and it's not working properly, that can contribute to lots and lots of illnesses and to symptoms. Poor sleep is foundational. We're going to talk a bit more about that. Hormone imbalance, a lot of men, and but particularly women, we struggle with our hormones. And if your hormones are out of whack, then it's going to contribute to illness. Hypoxia, lack of oxygen, is a big one. We're not necessarily breathing very well. The air that we're breathing is not necessarily very good quality. Getting good quality oxygen into our bodies and deeply into our body system and into our cells is really critical. And of course, if our circulation isn't working terribly well, if we're very sedentary and we're not moving, then we're not pumping that oxygen around. We lack oxygen. A lot of us are suffering from low-level hypoxia because of all of our, our lifestyle. And oxygen is crucial for life, for everything. So, that impacts our health. Infections, I've talked about viral infections there, but we can have bacterial or fungal infections, things like candida and fungal overgrowths. And also, in my case, I had Lyme disease. Any of these kind of bacterial or fungal infections that are grumbling away inside of us. Parasites is another one. We can have all sorts of things. We pick them up, they sit inside us, and they don't make us ill noticeably, but they're just there grumbling away and causing a strain on our immune system and contributing to that inflammatory picture. Mold exposure is a big one, for many of us who have MCAS, particularly. Being exposed to mold is really unhelpful for a lot of people. It contributes to that inflammatory picture. And having mental and emotional distress, any traumas, adverse childhood events that may have impacted you, they all stay in our body, and it's important to understand that this is not saying that your physical illness is a mental, emotional issue and that it's all in your head. It's not that at all. When we experience traumatic things and mentally and emotionally distressing things, it changes our body physically at a cellular level, and we hold that. So if we've got those things, they can be one of the layers that are underneath our illnesses and driving our illness. So working out which of these root causes, working with a practitioner, doing tests, understanding what your root causes are is really, really helpful for understanding your health and for supporting your health. And resolving any of these issues is a foundational pillar of health. And I said I was going to mention the mitochondria there because these little organelles, little sort of bean-shaped structures inside every single cell in our body, they are our energy factories. They produce what we call energy, and they use oxygen and glucose. They do a complicated process to bind those together and produce adenosine triphosphate, ATP. And when we talk about energy, when we say, oh, I haven't got much energy today, or I'm feeling, fatigued and lacking in energy, what we're talking about there is ATP. We mean that we haven't got enough ATP, and it's required for every single bodily function. Just sitting and thinking costs us ATP. Being asleep at night costs us ATP. We're using that currency of energy in the body literally just to stay alive every single second of every single day. And then if we do anything like, take an exam or give a talk or run up a hill or, do some work, that uses even more ATP. So we absolutely need our mitochondria to be functioning optimally, to be pumping ATP out as quickly as they can, because we're gobbling it up in our day-to-day lives. And many people who have a chronic health condition, studies are now understanding that quite often we have issues with our mitochondria. Our mitochondria are not functioning optimally and not producing enough ATP, and that can then be really a foundational aspect of our health, because if we're not producing energy, our heart uses loads of energy. If our heart is not getting the energy it needs, it's not pumping properly. So then we don't get the transport going around the system. And then, we have all sorts of knock-on effects from that. So many of the root causes that we've just looked at on those previous slides, like viral infection, like bacterial infection, like mold exposure, like nervous system dysregulation and trauma, all of these things affect our mitochondrial function. They've been shown to downregulate the mitochondria. So that's how they contribute to fatigue and illness. So, things there like stress and toxin exposure is a big one. The toxins that we're exposed to environmentally, they get inside our cells and they mess with the way that they function, and they affect our mitochondria and the mitochondria's ability to produce energy. Oxidative stress that I talked about, this metabolic process in the body that creates these free radicals that damage cells. It's the mitochondria that they're damaging a lot of the time. So looking after our mitochondria is a really fundamental pillar of health. So moving on now to gut health, and I've alluded to what goes on in our tummies and how important that is as a foundational pillar of health. So there's literally trillions of viruses, bacteria and fungi living inside of our cells, these little microorganisms. And in some studies suggest that they outnumber our human cells by 10 to 1. So there's more foreign material, viral, bacterial, fungal cells in our body than there are human cells in our microbiome. And there's literally thousands. There's 1,000 different species of bacteria on their own, and they're really beneficial for our health. They do good things for us. They process our food for us. They help us with digestion. The bacteria that live in our gut produce vitamin K. We don't really get vitamin K really from very many other sources. The majority comes from our gut microbiome, and our gut microbiome helps to balance our hormones. There are bacteria that live in our gut that help us to metabolize and get rid of hormones, of estrogen in particular. So if we're not having the right balance of gut bacteria, it can contribute to all of those underlying causes. It affects our mental health as well. The gut microbiome is communicating with our brain through the vagus nerve, and there's this two-way conversation going on between the brain and the microbes in our gut. And if we've got the wrong microbes, it can contribute to our mental health and our stress levels. So it's really important for mental and physical health that we have a good, strong gut microbiome that's full of diverse species, and particularly the good, friendly bacteria. And when we have an imbalance there and some of the bad guys get kind of overgrow, it's called dysbiosis. And this is linked to lots of different health conditions. So there's studies now showing that fibromyalgia, ME, cancer, autism, depression, all of these conditions, when they sample people who have those health conditions, they sample their gut microbiome, they find dysbiosis. They find that they are lacking in certain specific strains, and they're actually now in the research showing which strains contribute to which illness. So if you're lacking in certain strains, you have depression. If you're lacking in other strains, you might have autism. Or if you've got too many of these bad bacteria, certain strains, then they are contributing to certain illnesses. So the research here is really exciting and really interesting, and it's still, in its early stages, but we're starting now to recognize that having a healthy gut is critical for our well-being, and it is an absolutely foundational pillar of health. And we can influence our gut microbiome. There's lots of different ways that we can do it, but probiotics, live bacteria, and the standard advice is to eat fermented foods like kombucha and kimchi and live yogurt, sauerkraut. For us, obviously, with MCAS, those fermented foods can be troublesome because they're high in histamine as well. But it's a case of finding what works for you and doing what we can to support the gut microbiome. And for some people, they tolerate things. It's not necessarily that we have to avoid these things. It may be that you can tolerate them. Everybody is different. So it's worth experimenting and exploring what you can tolerate. And on this slide, I've just got a few of the things that help us to keep our gut healthy. So fiber, plenty of good complex carbohydrates, fiber, brown rice, brown pasta, fibrous vegetables, any kind of fiber helps because the bacteria, the good guys that live in our gut, feed on fiber. They need fiber to eat. So we have to eat fiber in order to support them. And the same with prebiotics. These types of vegetables, particularly, I've just had some Jerusalem artichoke for my tea tonight, and they're absolutely brilliant source of prebiotic fiber that our gut microbiome like to feed on. And cruciferous vegetables as well, you know, what used to be called brassicas, so broccoli and sprouts and cauliflower and cabbage, those kind of vegetables, they feed our good gut bacteria. And the probiotics, the live bacteria that we can eat. Water is absolutely critical for our gut. It doesn't work if we're not well hydrated. So one of the best things you can do for your gut health is to drink lots of pure filtered water. Whole grains, as I said there, you know, brown rice, brown grains, polyphenols in a lot of fruits and vegetables, these substances, plant chemicals that contain all sorts of really beneficial substances that help our gut microbiome. Stress management, as I said, there's this two-way communication going on all the time. And when we're very stressed, that affects our digestion and it affects our gut microbiome and it actually damages the gut microbiome. So using stress management tools and exercise helps with our good bacteria. It increases the numbers of good bacteria and also produces a substance called butyrate, which is a small chain fatty acid, which is essential to short chain fatty acid, I should say, which is essential to the gut lining, to protecting our gut lining. It's what our gut lining is made out of. And these microbiome bacteria produce butyrate by feeding on the prebiotic fiber. And also when we exercise, we're producing butyrate, and that substance helps to keep our gut lining healthy and well. So there's lots of things there that we can do to help keep our gut happy. So detoxing now. Another pillar of health that I feel is absolutely foundational. And I've talked about this at length in other talks. So this is just a very brief look at this topic. And there is another 2 webinars on the Mast Cell Action YouTube channel about toxins and detoxing if you're interested. But lots of research showing now that exposure to these everyday chemicals that we use in our toiletries and our perfumes and our cleaning products, they contribute to inflammation, to oxidative stress, and to illness. And they can trigger neurological dysfunction. They can disrupt our gut microbiome. They're endocrine disruptors, so they disrupt our hormones and our thyroid function, which you can see there feeds into the root causes of illness. So if we've got exposure to these chemicals and these toxins, it triggers all of these things that then lead to illness. And I'm sure many of you will be familiar with the work of Dr. Sarah Myhill. She's a very well-known doctor in the ME community. A quote from her here: she's yet to do a fat biopsy of any of her ME patients and find that they're completely free from chemicals. And she suspects that many patients with chronic fatigue syndrome and multiple chemical sensitivity are not only reacting to chemicals outside the body, but maybe reacting to chemicals within their own body fat, because our bodies are incredibly clever. They don't want all of these toxic substances floating around and getting into our brain and into our liver and into our, into our heart. So they store those toxins in fat. They make fat cells and they stick the toxins into the fat and they stick them to our hips and our bottoms. And that's where they store the toxins that they can't get rid of. So thinking about the toxins that we're storing inside our bodies and how we can help our bodies to eliminate those is a foundational pillar of health and well-being these days. So in very brief terms, avoiding additives and colorings and artificial sweeteners and pesticides and herbicides that are in food. We can look at the way that we eat, and also what we're cooking in. So non-stick pans and plastic utensils and cooking food in the microwave in plastic packaging. All of that is releasing toxic chemicals into the food that we're eating. So we need to think about how we're cooking food, how we're storing food, and what sort of food we're eating to reduce the exposure to chemicals. And then the environment, thinking back to my goldfish Gary and his fish tank, we need to think about our fish tank. We need to think about our air and our water and make sure that we are not breathing in artificial perfumes and chemicals, cleaning products, room scents, toiletries and makeup that we're putting on our skin. All of these things contain chemicals that have been linked to nervous system dysfunction, inflammation, endocrine disruption, all sorts of health issues. So trying to swap out those chemical products, man-made chemical products, and swapping them for more natural products and the eco-friendly ones. Ironically, they're marketed for the environment, but actually they're better for us as well, generally speaking, because they have less toxins in and less chemicals. However, when we have MCAS, it's important to note that just because it's a natural product, it doesn't mean that we won't react to that. So we still have to test things and be careful whether natural things can trigger an MCAS reaction just as much as a chemical, a man-made chemical. So it's a case of finding the products that work for you. But generally speaking, the more you can get rid of those man-made toxins, the better for us. And there are diet and lifestyle ways that we can support our bodies to detox. So I mentioned eating brassicas before. They contain substances called glucosinolates that are really, really helpful to our liver, that helps our liver to get rid of these chemical substances. So we need to eat things like Brussels sprouts and cauliflower and kale, cabbage, that support our liver. Similarly with sulfur, there's a different pathway in the liver detox process that sulfur is needed for, and we get that in onions and leeks and garlic, and also broccoli sprouts. So you can get little broccoli seeds and sprout them on your windowsill very easily, like cress. And after a few days, you've got these little sprouts and you can eat those, and they're packed full of sulforaphane, which supports our sulfation pathway in our liver. Dandelion is really helpful for stimulating our digestive system and our bile system, which helps to detox our body. When the liver has processed the toxins, it puts them into the bile to then get them put into the intestines so that we can then eliminate them through our bowel. So we need to support our bile function and our digestive function, and dandelion is a really good way of doing that. Again, if you tolerate it, it's important to check. Fiber, essential for bowel movements to keep, that is the main sewer. That is everything that shouldn't be in our body drains into our bowel, and we need to eliminate that at least once a day. And so we need to be eating the fiber to support our bowel movements, but also because the fiber binds to the toxins and stops them from being reabsorbed. Because the problem is, once things have been put into our bowel from our lymphatic system, from the liver, all of these toxins have gone into the bowel to be eliminated. If they sit there for any length of time, the body just reabsorbs them. So if we eat fiber, it binds to the toxins and holds them in the bowel and stops them from being reabsorbed. Water, again, foundational for so many aspects of our health, but absolutely essential for detox, because we need to have that fluid moving through our bowel to wash things out and keep our bowels working, but it also works our lymphatic system, that the lymphatic fluid that is draining toxins out of our tissues, that is primarily water. Our blood that is circulating around the body, that's primarily, composed of water. So we must keep the water levels up in order to keep the system working and things moving through our body. Epsom salt foot baths are a good way to encourage us to eliminate toxins through the skin. But when we have MCAS, we have to be really careful with that because it can trigger a reaction. We can have a really strong reaction to that. So if you did try to do that, the general detox advice is to have Epsom salt baths, and I would not recommend that. I think we should start with foot baths and a really tiny amount of salt to begin with, and be really, really slow and gentle with doing that. Lymphatic drainage is another really great way of getting those toxins moving. The lymphatic system is a kind of drainage system that runs vessels that run all the way through the body that carry the toxins out of our tissues and away from our brain and into our bowel to be eliminated. And we need to keep that flowing and moving because it doesn't have a pump like the heart is pumping blood around our veins. The lymphatic system doesn't have a heart, doesn't have a pump. So we need to sometimes encourage the lymph to move and keep it moving. So professional lymphatic drainage massage is a really helpful thing to do. You can do dry skin brushing, and there's lots of videos on YouTube of how you can do self-massage, but also the lovely Ellen for Mast Action comes once a month on a Wednesday to do a webinar about virtual massage that we can do ourselves, and she's super lovely. So if you're not already coming to Ellen's session, that's something else to think about there. And movement, as I said, the lymphatic system doesn't have a pump, so it's pumped by when we're moving. Our muscles moving helps to pump our lymphatic system and keep our toxins going out of the body in the right direction. So there's just a handful there of diet and lifestyle tips that can help us with that pillar of detoxing. So food and drink. What we're eating, foundational to health. And we talk about nutrition, but what really is that? So food, the definition of food is a nutritious substance that people or animals eat or drink, or which plants absorb, that maintains life and growth. And we've kind of really disconnected from this idea of food being something that maintains life and growth. We just eat what we fancy, we eat what we see on the adverts, we eat what we like, what we can buy in the supermarket, but we don't think about food in terms of what it's doing for our bodies. And nutrients, substances within food that provide nourishment, and they're essential for the maintenance of life and of health. It's absolutely essential for us to have nutrients in our food, to have nutritious food. And from a naturopathic perspective, we look at food as medicine. We look at the medicinal properties of food and think about what that food is actually doing in our bodies and what food our bodies need, what nutrients our bodies need in order to function optimally. And it's very much personalized, it's individualized. Each person has different nutrient requirements, and we need to be thinking individually about what does my body need, what food is going to support me and nourish me, and start looking at food as a source of nourishment for us. And basically, food is either macronutrients, so the macronutrients are proteins, fats, and carbohydrates, and they are, we need to eat those in large quantities. That's why they're macro. And then the micronutrients, we only need very tiny amounts of vitamins and minerals every day, but we do absolutely need those vitamins and minerals every day. They are absolutely essential for our bodily functions in every way. And so we need to think about more carefully about what am I eating, and is it giving me proteins, fats, carbohydrates, vitamins and minerals every single day. Patrick Holford, a quote there, your body and brain are made entirely from molecules that are derived from food, air and water. That is it. That is what we're made of. So those three components we need to be giving our body every single day: food, air, and water. And if we don't eat those nutrients, we don't get them. The body doesn't make those on its own. It can only get them from food. And if we're missing some of them, we become malnourished. And in our society today, we live in a society that is overflowing with food, really. We have almost too much food. And, the supermarkets are packed with food. But actually, many of us are malnourished because we're eating a lot, but we're not eating nutritious food. We're not eating the right food. And we need to think about food as being nourishment for the body. And I know that when we live with MCAS, food can become difficult for us because we can't eat all of the foods that we might want to or that we might feel we need to. And it's a balancing act, really, between learning to find what works for us and thinking about food in terms of what it's giving us and what we can eat, and trying to make sure that we, within our daily diet, within the limitations of what we can eat without triggering an MCAS reaction, making sure that we're choosing within our limits to eat a varied diet and with, as many different things in, and covering each of those areas of macronutrients and micronutrients within our limitations. And we can sometimes, if we're not thinking carefully, we can think, oh, well, I don't react to this and this, so I'll just keep eating this and this. But actually, you might not react to that, and that as well. And it's really important that you eat that, and that, and not just stick to those two, because you may not be getting all of the nutrients. And we need to think about food, sort of turn it round a little bit and think, how can I support my body to be well by eating as much as I can within the limitations of my MCAS diet? Because nutrient deficiency, ironically, feeds into MCAS, and our mast cells become more unstable when we are not, when we're deficient in nutrients, things like vitamin C and vitamin D and zinc. They're really critical, and magnesium, for how our mast cells are working, how our immune system functions, our inflammation levels. So, when we cut out lots of food, maybe unnecessarily in some cases, and really, go on a really strict limited diet, we can then make things worse inadvertently because we're depriving our body of nutrition. And so we need to think carefully about what we're eating and how, not necessarily is it going to trigger me. Obviously, we need to think about that as well. But also, is it going to nourish me? And rather than thinking of food as the enemy, think of what you can eat as being essential nourishment for your body. So there's lots of research, I've just put some here for interest, really, about the way diet can influence our health. So this comes from Action for ME. They've done some research between diet and fatigue, and they found in their studies that people who have fatigue sometimes find that things improve when they reduce gluten. Eating a generally healthy diet and avoiding processed foods and eating more fruits and vegetables has been shown to improve fatigue. Increasing consumption of antioxidant foods, so foods that help to reduce the effects of those free radicals. So plant foods like vegetables and fruits contain antioxidants that protect us from that oxidative stress. And avoiding food additives, artificial sweeteners, flavorings like monosodium glutamate, and artificial colorings and things in processed foods, because they can be toxic to the nervous system. And so their 2014 study found that 51% of people with fatigue that they surveyed had tried dietary changes, and of those people, 72% said it was helpful or very helpful. So it just goes to show that making some changes to our diet can actually really impact how we feel. 2017 study of people with fibromyalgia found that they all had lower levels of vitamin D than they should have had. So again, that's another indication that dietary issues and nutrient deficiencies can be playing a really big part in health conditions. So it's worth thinking about diet, and this is why nutrition, good food, is one of those foundational pillars of health. We can't really be fully healthy if we're not giving some consideration to the nutrients that we're putting into our body. And I've talked a bit about mitochondria, and there are certain nutrients that the mitochondria need. So it ties in with food. These things are all interconnected. So our mitochondria is not going to, or are not going to be functioning as well as they can if we're not eating the right nutrients. So B vitamins, coenzyme Q10, vitamin D, magnesium, and water, again, really critical for our mitochondrial function. So thinking about the foods that you can eat and whether any of them contain these substances, and making sure that you get those in during your day to give your mitochondria the best chance, because the mitochondria are using all of those nutrients to make eat ATP. It's very, very expensive in terms of nutrients to make energy like that. And so if we don't have the nutrients, if we're not constantly topping up that nutrient level, then our mitochondria are going to run out of energy, and they're not going to be able to make the energy for us. So our diet is critical for our health on a cellular level. This is minuscule in every single cell in the body. This is happening, and this is what the nutrients are doing for us. So pro-inflammatory foods, I mentioned at the beginning about how food interacts with inflammation, and there are some foods that provoke inflammation in the body, particularly sugar, artificial sweeteners, artificial colorings, processed fats. I'm going to talk very much more about that next month. Next month's talk is about inflammation and food, so I haven't gone into much detail tonight, but just to be aware that there are foods that provoke inflammation, and there are other foods that we can eat that help reduce inflammation. And as I say, we're going to explore that in much more depth next month, but just to be aware that there is this connection between food and inflammation. And what we drink is just as important as what we eat. Choosing to avoid those sugary drinks, fizzy drinks full of artificial sweeteners and colorings and flavorings. And the artificial sweeteners in particular in things like, Diet Coke and those kind of diet soda drinks, they've been linked in research to cardiovascular, heart disease, diabetes, gut dysbiosis. They really damage the friendly bacteria in our gut. They provoke inflammation, and there's even studies that they can cause damage to our DNA. So we want to be thinking about moving away from those and drinking pure filtered water. And just to be aware that tap water contains a lot of these pollutants in a lot of places: chlorine, lead, copper, nitrates, which are, chemicals from fertilizers potentially. Puffers, I'm going to try and say this, per and polyfluoroalkyl substances, which is a type of chemical found in non-stick pans and in waterproofing and stain proofing on fabrics, and also in some agricultural pesticides and things. They are endemic in the environment. They have leached into our water courses, and the research shows that a third of UK water courses are contaminated with them. So we need to be thinking about filtering our water so that our water is as pure and as clean as possible, because it's one of those foundational pillars of life. We need the water, we need food, and we need air. So clean air and clean water, really pivotal. Estrogen is our tap water can be contaminated with hormones, and also drugs, prescription drugs that people are passing out in their urine. It contaminates our water, and we are drinking and drinking those. So we need to filter our water, and we can drink things like herbal teas. We can put things like ginger and cucumber and other things that we tolerate, whatever you tolerate, into water to give it a bit of flavor. But generally speaking, we want to be focusing more on the herbal teas and the filtered waters to get our nutrition. So the nervous system now, I mentioned at the beginning how foundational our nervous system is, and what a key role stress plays in our health. So our nervous system within the body needs to be in balance. It needs to be balanced to be healthy, and we need to be able to access what's known as the rest and digest state. And when we're in a state of stress, when we're very activated and our nervous system is wired, we activate that fight or flight response, which we all know is that stress state. and that's meant to happen. It's okay for that to happen, but it's meant to be a short-term thing. We're meant to move into fight or flight to do some activity to protect ourselves or to action something, and then we're meant to come out of it again and move back into rest and digest. The trouble is that a lot of the time we end up stuck in that fight or flight, and that's fundamentally unhealthy long term, because those stress hormones, cortisol and adrenaline, are doing all sorts of damage to our body long term. And they also, it prevents us from being able to digest our food properly. When we're in fight or flight, our gut and digestive systems are switched off. So all of this lovely nutrition that we've just been talking about, you can be eating all of that, but if you're stressed, you're not going to be absorbing it through your gut properly. So we need to be working on keeping our nervous system in a state of rest and digest, relaxation techniques, calming, regulated nervous system is what is helpful for us, because that puts us into a state where we can do all of these things in the green box. We can digest and absorb nutrients, we can sleep, we can produce energy, we perform cellular repair and regeneration when we're in that rest and digest. Our bodies go into the repair mode and our cells start to get rid of the old dead wood, as it were, and regenerate. That happens in rest and digest, but it doesn't happen in fight or flight. And we can fight off viruses and infections. So if we're stressed all the time, our immune system's not working, we need to be in rest and digest in order to be able to fight colds and flus. We can't detox properly. We can't get those toxins out of our cells if we're in fight or flight, because our detox mechanisms switch off. And ultimately, we can heal when we're in rest and digest, and our body is able to be as healthy as possible. So we need to be reducing our stress levels and managing our nervous system in order to be in an optimal state of wellness. That's why it's on the list of pillars of health. And it's so key to understand this, because we have this idea that, relaxing is somehow self-indulgent and it's lazy, but actually it's essential for our health. It's completely essential as breathing and eating, because our bodies need to be in that state of rest and digest to function. And we can see here stress has been shown in research to cause DNA damage, contributing to illness, inflammation, causing oxidative stress and causing that cellular damage. Impairs our mitochondrial function, so we can't produce energy, releasing cortisol and adrenaline, which stops our digestion working, stops our bodies from healing and doing cellular repair. So any pre-existing condition, any health condition we've got is going to be, made worse by being in that state of stress. Prevents the body from detoxing, suppresses the immune system, as I said. So it's important, because studies show that all of that can be reversed. It's not permanent. As soon as we move out of stress and go into rest and digest, all of that negative stuff stops happening. So we can use tools to help balance our nervous system, things like mindfulness, meditation, breath work, doing things that we enjoy that release good chemicals like dopamine and serotonin and nitric oxide. Self-compassion is a huge part of this, the way we talk to ourselves, the way we look after ourselves. It changes our chemistry in our bodies. Doing things that we enjoy, like hobbies, and having something fun in our lives. Any kind of relaxation technique like hypnotherapy. And also, if we've got any kind of trauma, as we talked about at the beginning, adverse childhood events or traumatic experiences, big trauma or small trauma, those stay in our nervous system and they contribute to that level of stress that we're holding in our nervous system. And so doing some trauma therapy work can release that and then take the level of what's in our nervous system down and allow us to access rest and digest more easily. And having, a support network around us, making changes to our lifestyle, thinking about what we do on a daily basis that nurtures us and nourishes us and helps us to access that rest and digest, and connecting to other people and feeling safe, part of a community, being in contact with other people is really critical. So sleep is the next pillar of health. Poor sleep And again, this ties into the nervous system. When we're in that state of stress, we release cortisol, and cortisol stops us from being able to sleep. But it also has lots of effects on our health. Sleep or lack of sleep promotes obesity. It affects our insulin metabolism and the way that we process glucose, and can contribute to insulin resistance and diabetes. It affects our energy levels and the way our brain is working. It affects our pain perception, particularly increases our risk of heart disease and high blood pressure and cardiovascular disease, dampens down and suppresses our immune system function, but provokes inflammation, and has been linked to depression and poor mental health as well. So sleep, that's why it's earned its place here on the pillars of health. It's one of the key foundations that we need to work on. And interestingly, I've just put here the delta phase of sleep, when we're in that deepest phase of sleep, which we get most of between 10 p.m. and 2 a.m. We do most of our delta or longer phases of delta sleep. We do delta sleep after 2 a.m., but they're shorter, whereas between 10 and 2, the phases of delta sleep tend to be longer. Those phases of delta sleep are when something called the lymphatic drainage happens in the brain. So like the lymphatic system in the body, in that delta state of sleep, our brain is washing toxins out, and metabolites and oxidative stress, free radicals, they all get washed out of our brain and got rid of. So this is why it's so foundational to our health and our mental health as well, that we are getting good sleep. And just here, I did a whole talk on sleep. I think it was last month, and that is either is on YouTube or will be on YouTube. So I'm not going to go into it in too much detail, but just some of the things that stop us sleeping: high cortisol, anxiety, worry, pain, that blue light exposure, looking at our phones, looking at televisions and computer screens at night. Our pineal gland that produces the melatonin, it doesn't do that unless we're in complete darkness. And we need to not be exposed to blue light late in the day, because our circadian rhythm thinks of that as daylight. So it doesn't tell our brain that it's time to start producing melatonin and go to sleep. Our brain gets confused and thinks it's daytime, and it messes up with our circadian rhythm. And our circadian rhythm is responsible, very closely interconnected with our mast cell function, and our mast cells respond to our circadian rhythm. So when our circadian rhythm is out of balance, it contributes to mast cell dysfunction. So thinking about exposure to blue light and, putting that phone down. Erratic blood sugar. If our blood sugar level is not stable, our body releases cortisol to try and deal with that, and that then affects our sleep. Again, dietary deficiencies, these nutrients that we need for everything. Studies show things like calcium and magnesium and the vitamins are associated with sleep problems. If we don't have these vitamins, we can't sleep. Eating too late and having, digestive issues going on at night. We should eat, finish eating 3 to 4 hours before we go to bed, because our digestion needs time to process before we go to sleep, because we can't sleep very well if we're still digesting. Muscle tension, not having enough exercise, eating and drinking stimulants like spices and alcohol and caffeine, and just being overstimulated. Our nervous system needs to be in rest and digest. It needs to be calm. It needs to be relaxed in order to fall asleep. We need to feel safe. If we're watching horror films or reading books, that are a bit exciting, or doing something that's a bit stressful before bed, it upregulates our nervous system, so we can't sleep. And then movement is foundational for health, but problematic for a lot of us, and we can't maybe go to the gym and burn up, like we used to do maybe. So it's essential to move, because, as I said, our lymphatic system needs it for clearing toxins. Our heart needs to be, exercised in order to keep the blood flow going. Our bowel needs exercise to keep our gut working. Exercise helps to regulate our blood sugar levels, so it's connected to insulin resistance and diabetes. Bone density, so the osteoblasts that produce bone in our bones, the cells that make bone, they're triggered to make bone by movement. So when we're not doing enough movement, we don't produce bone as effectively. Obviously, muscle strength, we need to move to strengthen our muscles. Hormesis, our movement exercise, is a form of what's called hormesis, which is positive, good stress, which helps to trigger our bodies into a regeneration. So we know about things like sauna and cold therapy, you know, the Wim Hof method, and breathing practices and exercise. All of these things, and fasting as well is another way of, puts the body under a little bit of stress, just enough, not masses, but a little bit of stress that then generates the cells to start repairing and regenerating. So we need a little bit of good stress in our lives, and movement is one of those good stressors. And joint health, our joints don't get the nutrients into them. The blood supply doesn't get into our joints, and to nourish our joints and to keep that nice, the fluid that is needed in our joints, the synovial fluid. Movement is what pumps the fluid and the nutrients into the joints to keep our joints healthy. So if we're not moving the joint at all, it stagnates and dries up basically, and we don't get the nutrients and the fluid in there. So we know that we struggle to move sometimes, and we can get post-exertional malaise, and you know that is really dangerous, to push into too much exercise, to push yourself into a crash is not healthy. So we need to find a healthy balance here. So we're not doing too much, but we're doing just a little bit. And we can get caught in a vicious cycle of not doing any movement, which then leads us to feel worse because of all those issues that I've just talked about. So there is no one size fits all. It's really important that we all find the right way for us to move, and we don't push through our pain and discomfort. We listen to our own bodies and do what feels right. We're pacing strictly within our limits. Never push yourself into, you know, fatigue. I was advised to do 50% of what you feel capable of. So don't use up all your energy. Just do a little bit within what is accessible to you, and just small movements. You know, if you can't do lots of exercise and go to the gym, it doesn't mean that it's hopeless and you can't benefit from movement. There's been studies that show 3 seconds of movement a day, just 3 seconds, 12% increase in muscle mass in 1 month. So it is worth doing even small amounts of movement. And you know, Marcel Action have their Pilates, seated Pilates, Dance for Wellbeing, Qigong classes. Highly recommend that you do those if you can get to them, even if you do just a bit of it. And you know, walking, bed yoga, physiotherapy, you know, working with someone else, massage, all of that moves our muscles and helps to keep us, you know, fit within our capacity. So movement is one of the pillars of health. Connection, I mentioned when I was talking about our nervous system, we're wired for co-regulation. We co-regulate with one another. So our nervous systems kind of talk to one another. We all know when you're in the presence of someone who's got a really calming and relaxing way of being, it helps to calm your nervous system. It's like when a baby is crying and distressed, and you pick it up and you hold it, and that sense of being held and in connection with you calms the baby's nervous system. And we're just grown-up babies. Our nervous systems are still working the same way. We need to regulate with other people, which is why being connected to others and being able to talk to others and have a support network around us is so critical. And I know that many people have difficulty with friends and family. When we become ill, we can become isolated. We don't get a lot of understanding sometimes from the medical profession and from those around us, and we can feel very alone, and that really impacts negatively on our health, actively affects our physical health. So finding your tribe is really important. Finding people who you can connect with, who support you, who understand you. Seek out that connection with people and find people that you can make connections with. And again, the Marcel Action Community Support Sessions on Thursday nights, that's what that's for. That's for us to get together and talk to each other and be part of a community and make connections there. Spend your time with people who uplift you and support you, and try and limit your exposure to, toxic people. It's all back to that fish tank analogy again. Our environment is affected by the people who are in it as well. And finally, purpose. I've done a whole talk on purpose, so I'm not going to say a lot about it, but it is one of the pillars of well-being, because studies show that having a sense of purpose is really important for our health. And it doesn't have to be huge. It just has to be a small something that gives you a sense of meaning, a sense of fulfillment and accomplishment that matters to us, connects us to something that feels bigger than us, and is a way of challenging ourselves a little bit, using our unique skills and talents and experiences, stretching us in a good way, because it gives us a chemical hit, all those good chemicals that keep us healthy, endorphins, dopamine, oxytocin, nitric oxide, all those good brain chemicals. It changes our body chemistry and it keeps us well, and contributes. Research, suggests that it's associated with an extra 7 years of life, having a sense of purpose and meaning in life. And it doesn't have to be a very big thing. As I said, just doing something that you enjoy, doing some craft, looking after your pets, anything small that you can do, having a hobby, gives you a sense of purpose. Being part of a community, even just answering messages on the Facebook group, something that you feel you're contributing. And again, the Marcel Action Creative Session, the second Tuesday of every month, there's a session there where you can explore your creativity and maybe do some hobbies and things. That's all contributes to purpose. And I always talk to my clients about purpose and encourage them to do some purpose work and to think about what their purpose is. And one of my clients said to me, I've been working with him for probably, I don't know, a year now, and he said to me the other day, I know now why you get people to do this, because having the sense of something greater than myself, and a bigger vision of where I want to go in life and what I want to do, has kept me going, has sustained me through really difficult times and the ups and downs of being ill on a daily basis. But just having that sense of what you want to do and where you want to go and what you want to be, and having something to look forward to every day, helps you take you out of that. So we've been through every single one of these clouds now, and these are what I think are the pillars of health. And I think that if we just make small changes in each of these areas, not all at once, not all at the same time, it's overwhelming to try and make lots of changes. Just choose one thing, one small thing that you can do, and work your way around these different areas and think about which areas you might be lacking in. Maybe you're not doing anything to support yourself, and what you can do to help your body. And this self-care wheel worksheet is available on the Marcel Action website. It's one I did for a talk last year, but it's still there. It's still available to download. And you can use this self-care wheel. Each of the pillars there is represented by the segments, and you can make a mark there of where you feel you are, and then where you want to be, and what actions would take you from where you are to where you want to be. What would it take to improve your score by 1? If you're a 5 now in your diet, what would make it a 6? Would adding 1 more food in, or would eating one of your safe foods more regularly be helpful? So thinking about what you can do and using this worksheet as a kind of tool to help you with looking at the pillars of health in your own life and how you could improve each area just a little bit, maybe just one point. So those are all of the different areas. That's a summary at the end, and those are my contact details. As I said, we have run over, so if you've got questions, I suggest that you email me at livewellwithchronicillness@outlook.com.